Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Tyrone back with Tech Life. So in this video, I wanted to bring this chart up again, and I'll link the original article from Light Reading in the description where this chart came from, so you guys could check it out. So in this video, I wanted to discuss Verizon more as a focus, and how they have more of a better balance of their macro sites and where they are placed. So if you look at the Verizon chart here, in the top 100 markets, they have still, to this day, they have the most amount of postpaid users. The numbers you see here from AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile are postpaid only subs. This doesn't include connected cars, Wi-Fi devices inside the vehicle. No, it's just straight postpaid. So Verizon's still at 143 million postpaid subs. So they have a very solid spectrum portfolio in the, below 6 gigahertz. That includes the C-band that they purchased, which they spent a lot of money on. They did not get any of the DoD, which is what I anticipated, which is what my sources told me, because they've been in meetings and they said they just didn't want to climb the sites again to deploy DoD radios. So they went big on that. And of course, millimeter wave is not included on this chart for any carrier. But Verizon, we know they have a great holdings of millimeter wave spectrum, and they are actually deploying it at bigger scale than any of the other two. So they have solid density. So how did they achieve this, right? They have a total of 72,000 macros. So in this case, you would automatically think, like I said in the first video, that T-Mobile has the best coverage. They have more macros. They got 79,000 macros. So here's what Verizon has been doing since very early on in its network build. They struck a great balance. So they have a good amount of the macros deployed in the rural environment, in the suburban environment, and then in the urban core, the top 100 markets, they have deployed more of a mixture of macros and small cells. That's how Verizon went about it. Verizon could easily, if they wanted it to, be at the same macro count as T-Mobile or more. But they chose to sprinkle in more of a mixture into these markets. That's what they chose. That's what their engineering team chose. They said, okay, we're going to build a decent, dense macro grid, but we're going to sprinkle in a bunch of small cells within that footprint to densify the network. T-Mobile chose otherwise. T-Mobile during HSPA had no low band, so they had to build a ton of macros just to get somewhat of a substantial coverage footprint within these markets. They needed indoor penetration. They only had PCS to work with and AWS, so they had to build the macros very, very tight so they could have at least some type of coverage. And then they were going to go to voice over LTE, so they really needed a dense macro grid. So that's how Verizon went about it. Now Verizon has to really strategically, from what I'm told, build more macros in the more rural settings, right? The macros more spaced out there, lots of spacing for low band, band 13. So they got to fill in some sites. I think you guys have voiced your opinion on that you understand that needed to happen. I spoke with other analysts that know that needs to happen. And Verizon themselves, eventually they will admit that they have to build more sites in the rural environment to really get that C-band coverage to meet the pops or where it needs to be. That's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm being told. Not saying that the C-band range is bad, but if the spacing is just too far apart, there is no mid-band, even 2.5 is not going to reach if the site spacing is too far apart. So that's something that Verizon still has to work on, and they're doing that at about a 2,000 to 3,000 annual basis. That's how many macros they're deploying on an annual base. So they'll eventually get there. So from a network perspective, Verizon in a very great position. In a lot of these rural markets, they got 200 megahertz of pure contiguous C-band. That's 100 megahertz on the A block, 100 megahertz on the B block. They can deploy it all. Right? They can deploy it quickly. Like I stated in the previous video, in some markets where they're more busier, in a rural environment, they will deploy 2 separate radios. So you'll see 2 massive MIMO panels on the site on the same sector. The reason they're doing that is so both of the A and the B block can blast at full power for range to get the most out of that macro that they possibly can get. So in a setting, even T-Mobile is dealing with this too, and AT&T as well. Well, AT&T maybe not so much because they did deploy DoD on a different panel. But in a setting where you have to deploy multiple blocks to achieve a total amount of spectrum, if it's coming from one panel, you have to split the power. T-Mobile has to do this too. Verizon, in this case, in more busier environments, they would run the A block on one panel at full power and the B block on one panel on full power. So that's going to benefit the consumer there. But again, that's not something that Verizon's going to do at super big scale. They're going to do it very strategically, very smartly, and that's how they're going to approach that. So make sure you guys stay tuned for more. Just wanted to share that with you guys, that Verizon took a more balanced approach. Now they have to upgrade and modernize in the more rural parts to get to that higher end number of pops. So they got a lot of work to do. And of course, they still have to grow that consumer business. So make sure you guys stay tuned for more. Like, share, subscribe, follow my social media outlets. This is Tyrone with Tech Life, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.